A violent storm was sweeping across the Kansas prairie when a lonely widowed rancher spotted a mother walking through the rain, clutching her tiny baby in her arms. She had no home, no money, and nowhere left to go. When the rancher stopped his wagon, she made a heartbreaking request. "May we sleep in your barn?" But she had no idea that the stranger she feared would soon become the man who changed her and her baby's lives forever. What happened that stormy night would turn a lonely ranch into a place filled with hope, love, and a second chance. Before we begin, please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming Western stories. And now let's get started. The rain had been falling since dawn across the lonely Kansas prairie in the autumn of 1887. By late afternoon, the dirt roads had turned into rivers of mud, and the cold wind swept across the open land like a knife. Thomas Reed, a widowed rancher of 38, was returning from town in his old wooden wagon. His horse struggled through the mud, and Thomas pulled his wool coat tighter around himself. His ranch had been quiet for nearly 2 years. Since his wife had died, Thomas had learned to live with silence. He spoke little, worked from sunrise until dark, and rarely visited town unless business required it. But that evening, something caught his eye. A woman was walking along the roadside. She carried a tiny baby against her chest, trying desperately to protect the child beneath a thin, soaked shawl. Her dress was covered in mud, and her shoes were nearly falling apart. Thomas immediately pulled the reins. "Ma'am," he called, "where are you headed in this weather?" The woman stopped but did not answer at first. She looked frightened, exhausted, and ashamed. "I am trying to reach Mercy Creek," she finally whispered. "That's 12 miles from here." "I know." Thomas climbed down from the wagon. "You'll never make it before dark." The woman lowered her eyes. "I have no choice." The baby began crying. Thomas noticed the child's tiny lips trembling from the cold. Without another word, he removed his heavy coat and placed it around both mother and baby. "Get in the wagon." The woman hesitated. "I cannot pay you. I didn't ask for money." "My name is Clara Miller," she said softly. "My husband died last winter. We lost our farm after the debts came due. I have been staying wherever people would let me, but today, the last family turned us away." Thomas looked toward the darkening sky. "You and that baby need shelter." Clara swallowed hard. "I have nowhere left to go." Thomas studied her face for a moment. He understood what loneliness could do to a person. "You can come to my ranch." Clara stared at him. "Your ranch?" "Yes." She looked toward the distant hills. "I do not want to be a burden." "You won't be." Thomas helped her into the wagon and carefully wrapped the baby in an extra blanket. As they traveled through the storm, Clara remained silent. When the ranch finally appeared through the rain, she looked at the small barn and the modest farmhouse. Then, almost embarrassed by the question, she whispered, "Mr. Reed, may we sleep in your barn?" Thomas stopped the wagon. "No, ma'am," he said gently. "You and that little girl will sleep somewhere warmer than a barn tonight, P." Thomas led Clara toward the farmhouse, while the rain hammered against the roof and the wind howled across the prairie. Clara expected him to change his mind, but instead he opened the front door and stepped aside. "You can sleep here," he said. "There's a fire in the hearth." Clara entered slowly, holding her baby close. The little girl's name was Emma. She was barely 6 months old and had spent most of the journey crying from hunger and cold. Thomas warmed some milk and prepared a bowl of stew for Clara. That night, Clara slept beside the fireplace while Thomas took the chair near the kitchen. For the first time in months, Clara felt safe. The storm lasted 3 days. During those days, Clara helped around the ranch. She mended Thomas's torn shirts, cleaned the kitchen, and cooked meals. Thomas repaired fences and cared for the horses. Neither spoke much about the past. But something began changing. Every morning, Emma smiled when Thomas entered the room. One evening, Thomas returned from the barn and found Clara sitting beside the old rocking chair near the window. "That belonged to my wife," he said quietly. Clara stood immediately. "I'm sorry. I should not have touched it." Thomas shook his head. No, you don't have to apologize. He looked at the empty chair. My wife and I planned to raise children here. She died before we ever had the chance. Clara lowered her eyes. I'm sorry. Thomas gave a faint smile. I thought this house would always be empty. Weeks passed. Clara never asked Thomas for anything. She worked hard and slowly became part of the household. Emma grew healthier, and the ranch seemed less lonely than it had in years. Then one evening, Thomas returned from town with unexpected news. The bank has agreed to give me another year, he said. I can keep the ranch. Clara smiled. That is wonderful. Thomas looked at her for a long moment. There is something else. Clara waited. I want you and Emma to stay. Her eyes filled with tears. As a hired woman? Thomas shook his head. No, as family. Clara could hardly speak. You hardly know me. I know enough. He gently took her hand. You came here asking for a place in my barn. But somehow, you brought life back into my home. Clara smiled through her tears. I think, she whispered, that perhaps this was the home we were both searching for. Thomas smiled. And beneath the fading Kansas sunset, the lonely rancher finally understood that sometimes the greatest blessings arrived disguised as storms.